The key turns in the lock the same way it has for the last 6 years. There's no rush behind it, no second set of footsteps trailing in from the driveway, no voice calling out to ask what's for dinner. The door closes, and for a moment the house holds its breath the way it always does before settling back into silence. She sets her bag down on the counter, exactly where she left it that morning, exactly where it will be tomorrow. The kitchen is clean because she left it clean. The mail is stacked because she stacked it. Nothing in this house has moved without her hand moving it. And somewhere between hanging up her keys and filling a glass of water, there's a version of this scene that most people watching would read as sad. A woman, past 40, coming home to an empty house. Alone again. But that reading says more about the person watching than the woman living it. For a long time, the story told about women like her has been a story of subtraction. Something was supposed to be here and isn't. A husband who should have stayed. Children who should still be underfoot. A fuller table, a louder hallway, a life with more people in it. The assumption sits quietly underneath almost every conversation she has about her living situation, the raised eyebrow at church, the well-meaning aunt who asks if she's still single, the coworker who says you're so independent in a tone that isn't quite a compliment. The assumption is that solitude, for a black woman in her late 40s or 50s, is something that happened to her. A loss. A leftover. But ask her, and the story sounds different. Ask her what these years actually feel like, and you start to hear something closer to relief than grief. Not the absence of love, but the absence of performance. Not a woman who couldn't hold a family together, but a woman who spent 3 decades holding everyone together and finally set the weight down. This is the part that gets missed. Because for women of this generation, care was never optional. It was the job description handed down before they were old enough to understand what they were agreeing to. Watch the younger cousins while the adults talk. Help your grandmother with her medication. Keep an eye on your brother. Later, it became watch the children while building a career, manage a household while managing a marriage, show up for aging parents while nobody thought to ask who was showing up for her. Researchers who study what's sometimes called the sandwich generation, adults simultaneously caring for children and aging parents, have found that this kind of prolonged, layered caregiving takes a measurable toll, not just on time, but on identity itself. The self gets buried under obligation, one reasonable request at a time, until a woman can spend years without a clear answer to a simple question: what do I actually want? Separate from what everyone else needs from me. So when the house empties, when the children grow and go, when a marriage ends or never quite arrives, when the parents she cared for are no longer here to care for, what looks like an ending to an outside observer can feel, internally, like the first real beginning she's had in decades. There's a particular kind of memory that surfaces around this. The weight of a keychain that used to hold 5 keys and now holds 2. Cooking a pot of greens out of pure habit, seasoning enough for a family that isn't there to eat it, and standing in the kitchen a little stunned by her own muscle memory. The landline that used to ring constantly during those years, school, church, family, favors, sitting silent now, replaced by a quiet she still isn't fully used to. A mother's voice, or a grandmother's, from somewhere in the past, saying that a woman without a husband and children is a woman who hasn't finished her life's work. That sentence lived in a lot of these women for a long time. Some of them are only now, in their 50s, learning how to set it down. There are other memories too, smaller ones, the kind that don't announce themselves. The smell of a hot comb on a Saturday morning. A church fan moving slowly in a hot sanctuary while a sermon stretched past noon. An aunt who never remarried, who the family used to talk about in hushed, slightly pitying tones, and who, looking back now, seemed like one of the calmest people in every room she entered. Report cards signed for other people's children. Wedding invitations addressed and mailed for nieces and godchildren, while her own name stayed off most guest lists as anything but auntie or the one who always shows up. A house full of framed photographs of everyone else's milestones, and comparatively few of her own. These aren't tragic memories. They are simply the quiet evidence of a life spent facing outward, toward other people's needs, for so long that facing inward eventually started to feel like an unfamiliar direction. That's part of what makes this chapter so hard to name. There isn't a clean word in most families for a woman who is neither widowed nor divorced nor waiting, but simply living, deliberately, on her own terms. The culture has ready-made language for tragedy and ready-made language for romance, but very little for the space in between, the space where a woman is simply whole, unattached, and not in mourning about it. Without the right language, people reach for the nearest available story, which is usually a sad one. She becomes, in other people's mouths, a cautionary tale instead of what she actually is. A woman who did the math on her own life and decided peace was worth more than performance. It would be dishonest to pretend this space is only peaceful. There are nights when the quiet does turn into loneliness, when the house feels less like sanctuary and more like distance. Solitude and isolation aren't the same thing, but they can sit close enough together that it takes real self-awareness to tell them apart on a hard day. Psychologists who study this distinction point out that chosen solitude, time alone that a person actively wants, shapes, and controls, tends to support well-being, while imposed isolation, the kind forced by circumstance rather than choice, tends to erode it. The difference isn't whether a person is alone. It's whether they feel like the author of that aloneness or simply its subject. For many of these women, the answer shifts by the day. Some mornings the empty house is authorship. Some evenings it's just empty. That's why it would be a disservice to tell this story as a simple triumph, as though solitude were a destination she arrived at and never had to think about again. There are birthdays that land quietly instead of loudly. Illnesses handled without anyone to drive her to the appointment. Holidays that require decision, go somewhere and be surrounded by other people's families, or stay home and let the day be smaller than it used to be. These are real costs, not imagined ones, and pretending otherwise would flatten her story into something easier than it actually is. What's changed isn't that the hard nights disappeared. It's that she no longer needs the hard nights to mean something went wrong with her life. They are simply part of it, the way weather is part of any given day, present without being permanent. And yet, more often than not, what settles over the ordinary moments is something closer to ease. Morning coffee in a kitchen where nothing has to be negotiated. A closet organized exactly the way she likes it, with no one to disturb the system. The drive home from work spent in actual silence, no one to update, no one to manage, no emotional weather to read the second she walks through the door. A Sunday spent at church and then returning to a home that asks nothing further of her for the rest of the day. Old photo albums opened on her own schedule, revisited without an audience, grief and gratitude allowed to sit in the same room without anyone needing her to perform either one. There's a reason this particular life stage tends to arrive alongside a deeper shift in identity. The hormonal and psychological changes that come with midlife and menopause don't just affect the body. Researchers have found they often coincide with a broader reevaluation of self, priorities, and purpose. For a generation of women raised to define themselves through service to others, this convergence can feel disorienting at first, and then, slowly, clarifying. The question stops being who needs me today, and starts becoming who am I when no one needs anything from me at all. That question used to feel almost forbidden. Selfish, even. Now it's simply honest. None of this erases the cultural weight still pressing against her from the outside. The extended family that still asks when she's going to find someone. The community that still measures a woman's worth partly by the size of her household. The quiet suspicion that a woman content on her own must be either hiding pain or too guarded to be loved. These narratives haven't disappeared. She simply stopped organizing her life around answering them. What's changed isn't the house. The house is the same size it's always been. What's changed is her relationship to the silence inside it. The quiet used to feel like something missing. Now, more often than not, it feels like something earned, the sound of a life that finally belongs entirely to the person living it, with no translation required for anyone standing outside it. Tonight, like most nights, she moves through the house, turning off lights one by one, room by room, until only her own is left. There's no one to say goodnight to, and for the first time in a long time, that isn't the sad part of the story. It's simply the part where she gets to close her eyes knowing exactly who spent the day taking care of her, and knowing, finally, that the answer was always supposed to be her.